let's take a look now at some of the key areas surrounding Mosul and who is in control. Al-Quraya is about 60 kilometers south of Mosul. It was recaptured by government forces in August. After weeks of fierce fighting, the area has one of Iraq's biggest army bases. To the east of Mosul is Jazeera. Peshmerga forces muscled their way into the area 2 months ago, taking over villages controlled by ISIL. It's about 40 kilometers from the center of Mosul and has camps housing thousands of people who've escaped the fighting. And then there's Bashika, 25 kilometers northeast of Mosul. Turkey has deployed troops to the area. The Turkish president has said the soldiers are there to train local fighters at the request of Mosul's governor. But Iraq's prime minister has said Ankara doesn't have permission to be there. For more on this, I'm joined by guest Andreas Krieg, defence analyst and assistant professor of defence studies at King's College in London. Very good to have you with us. Let's pick up on that last point and what Turkey is doing. We know that the Iraqi president has said if you get involved, this is almost like an act of war. But it seems that Turkey is very keen. And if they're not invited, they say they've got a plan B. What are we looking at here?
Well, I mean, we have to first of all state Turkey didn't go on their own terms. They were invited by the Iraqi government to come and help in the fight, in the preparation of the fight of Mosul. Very important here, they are using local tribesmen to be equipped, to be trained in order to help in what is actually an assault on a mostly or entirely Sunni city. So it's very important that to understand that if you look at the Iraqi government, they're using mostly Shia militias, even though they call them popular resistance forces, as well as a military that is almost entirely Shia, made up of Shias. So even if this military can actually go in and liberate the city, it will be unable to actually hold the city and administer it and going forward into a stabilization phase of this entire campaign. And in this stabilization campaign, we do need a huge Sunni input in order to bond with the local population.
Do we know what the exit plan? I mean, I know we're a little advanced here, ahead of ourselves, but do we know of an exit plan? Because that's obviously incredibly important for all those reasons you just mentioned.
That's the biggest problem in military operations today, having an exit strategy. I mean, we're talking about easy to get in, very difficult to get out, and we're looking at, everybody's focusing right now on the military campaign, what's happening on the ground. Nobody's looking at the next phase, which is once after month and month of fighting, right? We're going to have a huge battle on the ground, loads of civilians probably unfortunately being killed. We might have a local uprising, we will have local Sunni tribesmen getting involved. So it is already a mess on the ground. After all this, ISIS might retreat, going towards the west, towards Raqqa, and then we need to stabilize the city and make sure that ISIS doesn't come back. In order for this to happen, we obviously need the local Sunni people who live in Mosul to somewhat bond with whoever's coming to stay. And whoever's coming to stay has to have a link with the local population. And I'm not sure that the Iraqi government is aware of this, because as you remember, June 2017, when Mosul was captured, it was Iraqi forces who left all their weapons behind and, 2014, and fled towards Baghdad. So you don't want this to happen again, because we need to have a solid relationship, civil-military relationship between the security sector coming to liberate and stay, as well as the local population.
Okay, saying all that, what we're seeing now on the ground right at this very minute today, any indication that they've got this in their mind as they're going in there? We've seen the Peshmerga forces slowly advancing along with Iraqi forces. What about the other players there?
Exactly. I mean, it is a proxy war, right? As everything that's going on in the Levant at the moment, Iraq and Syria as well. So there are Iranian forces on the ground, the Quds forces. They don't
want to miss out, clearly.
Of course, they don't want to miss out. I think many Sunnis perceive the Iraqi government to be a proxy of Iran, advancing the interests of Iran. And at the same time, we have a lot of Shia militias who have been trained by Iran, and Iran has an interest to keep this corridor, liberating Mosul, making Mosul a part of the Iraqi state as well as under the control of the Iraqi government, means that Iran has more influence going via Baghdad over Mosul towards Syria, which again, the Assad regime being a proxy of Iran. So Iran has a vested interest, Turkey has a vested interest in making sure that the PKK, which could also be part of this whole engagement, is not getting involved. The Kurds are not supposed to gain more territory in northern Iraq.
Turkey's worried about.
I'm not talking about the Peshmergas, because Peshmergas have a very good relationship with Turkey, but the PKK also has some forces in the north. So all these different, and the US has a vested interest in order to create stability. And nobody has an interest to create 1.2 million refugees, which might go and spread to other countries in the region.
Okay, let's talk about those refugees and getting them out of Mosul. We know how ISIL has behaved in the past. They like to use innocent people as human shields. I mean, what are we expecting when it comes to that part of the battle?
Absolutely. It's going to be a mess. To be honest, we knew this battle was coming for at least the last 18 months. I've been sitting with various leaders, military leaders from various backgrounds, Arabs and Westerners, Turks, who all said, if you want to take Mosul, you actually create a huge mess. You need to flatten the city, basically, because ISIS will fight corner by corner, street by street. They have tunnels. They use IEDs. They use booby traps, and they don't shy away from using civilians to blow themselves up, because they've done that in the past. So I think the civilians will be the ones who will suffer the most. And when the Iraqi government is saying that they take all precautions, it's all good, but it will not help, and there will be huge collateral damage in taking the city.
Right, we'll end on those words. Andreas Krieg, thank you.
Thank you.
ISIL there. Well, for more on this, let's speak once again to Andreas Krieg, defence analyst and assistant professor of defence studies at King's College in London. Welcome back. How tough will the fight for Mosul be?
Very tough. I don't think we're going to look here at a quick victory. It's going to be, first of all, what is victory anyway? Because it's not just liberating the city, it's about being there, staying there, and stabilizing the city. That's going to take months and months. We don't know yet how long it's going to take.
And of course, you might liberate the city. You haven't necessarily defeated the enemy, in this case, correct, ISIL, which might just move on somewhere else.
Exactly. ISIS is, most of all, an idea, and they can move on wherever they want to go. And the hardcore fighters, they don't care where they are, as long as they can control some city or some territory that they can extract money from. So ISIL pushing them out of the city doesn't even mean that they will not have cells within the city that remain, even though on the ground, on the surface, there are Iraqi government forces there.
Okay, all that's in the future. At the moment, the forces the Peshmerga forces and the Iraqi forces are laying the ground to get to Mosul. How is that working? Explain that for us.
I mean, if you look at the maps, I mean, you had a map earlier on. Basically, Mosul is surrounded from all areas, from the north, from the east, and from the south, but not from the west. So the west is the last corridor that ISIS retains in order to resupply or to move towards Syria. But from the north, you've got the Peshmerga, you've got some PKK forces. Northeast, you have the Turkish Sunni mobilization forces that have been trained by the Turks. In the east, you have more Peshmerga forces. In the south, you've got the Iraqi army, as well as some of the Shia militias that are supporting the Iraqi armed forces, and all of them trying to coordinate with themselves, between themselves, and with US air power overhead. And that makes it operational synergy quite difficult.
I suppose it's very difficult to predict, but how long is the battle for Mosul going to take until it comes to some sort of conclusion, if you like, and what will the battle look like?
All right. I mean, today we were quite quick to declaring victory once we see that a certain territory is free. But is that really victory? I mean, we will probably have a premature claim of victory, even though the battle is still continuing, particularly depending on who's moving into the city. So if right now we have a mostly Shia force moving back into a city that is entirely Sunni, we probably have a little insurgency within the city, not just against ISIS, but also against a Baghdad government force that is perceived as being an outside proxy. So, and that again can lead to further problems and insurgencies down the future. So long term, I think the key will be winning over the hearts and minds of the people of Mosul. And this is where everybody has to play their role. And so until we get there, it's going to be urban warfare, street by street. We're going to have booby-trapped houses. We're going to have snipers left, right, and center. We have a tunnel system, which is probably the most extensive, more extensive than Raqqa, where ISIS fighters can appear from nowhere, similar like we had that in Vietnam in the 1960s and 70s. So it's an everywhere war, everywhere from all angles. And at the same time, we're trying to target certain targets from the air, while we know that civilian population is all over the place. So the battle is right at the heart of civilian dwellings, and this is the key. Another key problem: how do you win over the population after you bomb them for months and months to come?
Andreas, many thanks indeed.
Thank you.
Has said that Ankara doesn't have permission to be there. Let's get some analysis now from Andreas Krieg, who's defence analyst and assistant professor of defence studies at King's College, London. He's with me now in the studio. Given all of that, How tough is the battle for Mosul going to be?
Very tough. I mean, we're looking at month and month of fierce fighting.
So it's not going to be over quickly?
It's not going to be over. There's not going to be a quick fix. First of all, there are various parameters around the city that have been secured by ISIS. It's first about securing these little villages around the city, and then actually penetrating into the city itself is going to be a very tough call, because you have to fight street by street, house for house, booby-trapped houses, snipers, and all kinds of nasty surprises that ISIS might have.
All right, we'll come to that in just a moment.
Yeah.
What's going on today? This is the first day of the battle for Mosul.
Yes.
What's happening right now?
I mean, the first phase of an operation is usually you're trying to take out key communication points for ISIS. You'll have artillery, you'll have airstrikes against key infrastructure that have been already designated for quite a long time. The question is going to be, once the target list depletes and once the target list is empty, what are you going to target afterwards? Because most of the targets are very soft targets. These are targets they're mobile targets as well. They move quickly around. ISIS has built tunnels around the city so they can move key people and key infrastructure, or not infrastructure, but key military assets from one part of the town to the other. So how do you target them from the air? Very difficult. So first you're trying to pave the way so that the infantry can move in. And the infantry is always going to be supported, obviously, by air power as they move forward.
And of course, Mosul isn't an empty city. There are thousands and thousands of civilians there too. I mean, they've been under almost constant bombardment for the last few weeks. I mean, what happens to them in the middle of this?
That's the good question. I mean, in the aftergame, we need to have them on our side, right? If we look for stabilizing the city. So we have to take absolute, I mean, when I say we, I'm saying the Americans, the Peshmergas, the Iraqi forces, as well as the Shia militias, all of them have to take absolute precaution when it comes to the use of force in this environment, because you have to spare the civilian population, which is an almost impossible task if you consider how densely populated the area is. And people are not able to leave because ISIS will tell them, if you leave, we'll shoot you. So they are being held hostage. So I would say 75 to 80% of the population do not support ISIS. They're actually against ISIS, but they can't leave because they're basically trapped in a huge prison.
And what do we make of this coalition that is fighting here? You've got the US-led coalition forces backing up the Iraqi army. You've got Peshmerga forces. You've got Turkish forces are on the ground, whether they're involved here. We've got Turkey's president saying he wants his troops to be involved. Yeah. Who's in the driving seat of all of this?
Very difficult to say, actually, at the moment. We heard Barzani earlier saying that this is a joint operation and we're cooperating for the first time with the Iraqi military, which is true, but both of them have completely different interests at stake here. Both of them have... The Kurds obviously want to take control of the northern part of, as much as they can, of Iraq. And Iraq wants to conquer a territory that for them has been somewhat lost territory, because the people who live there do not really support the government, because they see the government as a suspicious proxy of Iran. So nobody's really in the driver's seat. At the moment, the synergy is not really in place yet to say this is an actual joint operation. Even if we had NATO forces cooperating, they have problems coordinating. Now imagine having all these different state and non-state actors trying to work together. It's almost impossible.
Does Turkey come under that NATO umbrella?
Absolutely not. Turkey has their own interests, and we'll have to see how that pans out, particularly because they're using non-state actors to fight for them, militias.
Andreas, many thanks indeed. Great to talk to you. Turkey is sending a delegation from its Foreign Affairs Ministry to Baghdad to coordinate on the Mosul offensive.